I watched James leave without looking back, and for a long moment I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, my hand still pressed against the warm spot on the dining table where his coffee cup had been. It wasn't until I heard his BMW pull out of the driveway that I finally let myself breathe. I was back. 48 years old, standing in the same oak-paneled kitchen where I'd spent 2 decades cooking meals for a man who would eventually tell me I'd ruined his life. My wedding ring felt heavier than it should have. The same platinum band he'd slid onto my finger when I was barely 23, terrified and alone, freshly traded like livestock to settle a debt I never agreed to. The pregnancy test was still in my jacket pocket. I'd taken it that morning, 3 days before I was supposed to start my cycle, and the 2 pink lines had stared back at me in the bathroom mirror while James slept in our bed. In my previous life, I'd found out the same way. I'd been so hopeful then. So desperate to believe that a baby would finally make him stay, make him love me the way I'd spent 3 decades trying to earn. Now I pulled the test out and looked at it one last time, my thumb tracing the plastic edge. Not this time. I crumpled it into my apron pocket, sat down at the table, and ate the full breakfast I'd prepared for him alone. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, the rye toast he always complained about but never stopped eating. Every bite tasted like salt and ash, but I forced it down anyway. I need my strength. The family was coming back today. My mother, my father, my older brother Marcus, and Lily, their real daughter, the one they'd chosen when our family fortune collapsed 25 years ago. The one they'd shipped overseas with every dollar they could scrape together while leaving me behind to marry a comatose stranger and pray he'd wake up with some shred of gratitude. James had woken up all right. He'd woken up furious. I was still chewing my last piece of toast when the front door swung open and my mother's voice cut through the house like a blade. Eleanor? Eleanor, where are you, darling? She'd never called me that, not once in my entire life. But she'd watched enough British dramas over the years to know how it sounded. Warm, maternal, the kind of word that made people forget you'd abandoned your own daughter to a stranger's mercies. I stood and smoothed my blouse, the one with the small oil stain near the collar I'd never gotten around to treating. In my previous life, I would have changed, would have put on something more presentable, would have tried so hard to make them see me as worthy. Now I just walked into the foyer with toast crumbs still on my lips and looked at them, all 4 of them, standing in the entryway like they'd never left. My mother's face was younger than I remembered, her hair still dark, the wrinkles around her eyes less pronounced. In my final years, I'd watched her age into a brittle, bitter woman who still somehow blamed me for everything. Here, she was still handsome, still capable of mustering a convincing smile. My father stood behind her, arms folded, the same expression of vague disappointment I'd grown up seeing. Marcus was already scanning the house, taking inventory, mentally cataloging everything James had built and calculating how much of it would eventually belong to him. And Lily. Lily stood in the middle of them like a Renaissance painting, all dark curls and wide blue eyes, her hand resting delicately on the arm of the man who just followed her through the door. James had come back. Of course he had. He told me he was picking them up from the airport, and I'd watched him leave with that urgent, almost frantic energy he never had with me. But he hadn't just picked them up. He'd somehow brought Lily all the way inside, his hand at the small of her back, his body angled toward her like she was a flame, and he'd been freezing for 25 years. Eleanor, my mother said, stepping forward with her arms outstretched, I know this is sudden, but we had nowhere else to go. Your father lost everything in the bankruptcy, and Lily's health has been so fragile. She simply can't stay in a hotel. We can sleep on the street, but she'd catch pneumonia and... Where's her room? I didn't ask. I didn't even phrase it like a question. I just looked at James and waited. He blinked, like he'd forgotten I was there, like he'd walked into his own home and somehow expected the furniture to have rearranged itself in his absence. Eleanor. Mom said Lily needs somewhere to stay. Where's her room? My mother's mouth twitched at the edges. I caught it, that tiny micro expression of satisfaction, because she'd already told me what to do and I was doing it, just like always. She stepped back and pulled Lily forward, guiding her toward James like they were at a wedding, and it was her turn to give the bride away. James said he'd be happy to host her. My mother said, her voice dripping with a gratitude she'd never once offered me. We're so sorry for the intrusion, but we simply couldn't leave her alone overseas. She's so fragile, Eleanor, you understand, don't you? I understand that I spent 3 decades trying to be good enough for a man who was always in love with someone else. I understand that every meal I cooked, every night I spent alone while he worked late, every doctor's appointment for our 2 children that he missed. None of it mattered because he saw me and only saw a debt collected, an obligation, a consolation prize. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet. Lily ducked her head, her cheeks flushing that delicate pink she'd perfected over the years. I don't want to be a burden, Eleanor. James and I were just talking about old times, and he mentioned he had a spare room, but if it's too much trouble, I can always sleep on the couch. Or even the floor. I've done it before, you know, when we were younger and we'd have sleepovers at the beach house. You remember those summers, don't you, Eleanor? I remembered every single summer I'd been left behind while my parents took Lily to the beach house because somebody had to stay home and look after the house, didn't they? Somebody had to water the plants and feed the cat and pretend they didn't know they'd been traded for a prettier model. I didn't look at Lily. I kept my eyes on James. She'll take the spare room, I said. I'll move my things out by tonight. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or confusion. And my previous life, I'd fought him on this. I'd cried, I'd screamed, I'd reminded him that I was his wife and Lily had married someone else and she wasn't our problem anymore. But he'd won anyway, because he always won, and all I'd gotten for my efforts was another night spent alone while he settled her into the guest room and then spent the next 3 months pretending I didn't exist. This time, I just turned and walked toward the stairs. Behind me, Lily's voice drifted up, soft and apologetic. I feel so terrible about this, James. I don't want to upset anyone. Don't worry about her, James said, his voice dropping into that low, intimate register he'd only ever used on her. She'll adjust. Adjust. I paused on the landing, one hand gripping the banister, and forced myself to breathe. That word had been used my entire life, first by my parents, then by James, then by everyone who couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful for the scraps I'd been given. Adjust, Eleanor, settle, make do. I was done making do. The spare bedroom was nice point, 2 large windows, a queen-sized bed, and an ensuite bathroom. When James had bought the house, he'd insisted on keeping it furnished, in case we had guests. I'd wondered at the time why we never had any, why his family avoided us, why my parents never visited, why even our children seemed uncomfortable in this enormous house. Now I knew. The room had always been reserved for her. I hadn't moved much into the master bedroom anyway. James and I had shared a bed for 23 years, but shared was a generous word. He'd always turned his back to me, always kept his distance, always made it clear that our marriage was a transaction, not a union. The few things I'd brought with me when I moved into the main room were mostly gifts he'd given me out of obligation. Lingerie sets he'd bought because he liked the aesthetic, jewelry he picked up during business trips that I knew were actually intended for someone else. I pulled the black silk nightgown out of my drawer and stared at it for a long moment. He'd given it to me for our 15th anniversary, along with a diamond bracelet that was always 2 sizes too large. The nightgown still had the tags attached. I dropped it into a garbage bag with all the others and moved on. James appeared in the doorway while I was pulling sweaters out of the closet. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, and watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. In my previous life, I'd have taken this as hope, the fact that he'd come up here at all, that he'd seen me packing and felt compelled to intervene. I'd have let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was finally going to choose me. You don't have to do this, he said. I kept packing. I know. Eleanor. His voice dropped into that low, careful register, the one he used when he was trying to manage me. I'm not asking you to leave your own room permanently. It's just Lily's been through a lot. She's just gotten divorced. She needs a place to recover. Then she can have the room. Eleanor. I said it's fine, James, that I don't want to sleep in that room anyway. I pulled a scarf out of the closet and dropped it into the bag. You can have the master. I'll take one of the smaller rooms on the 3rd floor. He came into the room then, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. I felt his hand on my shoulder, warm and familiar, and for one sickening moment, I almost leaned into it. That was how he did it. That tiny gesture, that small intimacy, enough to make you forget that he just brought his ex-girlfriend into your home and expected you to just adjust. Eleanor, look at me. I looked at him. His face was close, too close, the way it always got when he wanted something. He'd inherited his mother's bone structure, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, thick dark hair that was just now starting to show silver at the temples. He was 47, 2 years younger than me, and he still looked like the man I'd married, which was somehow worse than if he'd let himself go. I'm not trying to push you out, he said, his thumb brushing my shoulder. I'm trying to find a way for everyone to be comfortable. That's not a bad thing, is it? I stared into his gray eyes and thought about the last time I'd seen him alive, how he'd clutched Lily's hand while I stood outside the hospital room door, how he'd begged God to let him die alone if it meant I couldn't be there to watch. I remembered the flat, dead quality of his voice when he'd finally spoken to me, 3 days before the end. If there's a next life, Eleanor, please don't find me. Stay away. Let me have one life where I'm not trapped with you. I remembered all of it, and somehow I still loved him, or thought I did, or hated myself for ever believing I deserved better. It's fine, I said, stepping back and letting his hand fall. I'm not upset. I'm just making space. He frowned. And my previous life. He'd have known I was lying. He'd have known me well enough to see through that careful mask, to hear the cracks in my voice. But I'd spent 30 years training myself to smile through anything, and here, in this second chance, the mask was thicker than ever. Eleanor, I'm going to be honest with you, he said, stepping closer. I know this is uncomfortable, but Lily and I have history. That history doesn't just disappear because I married someone else. You knew that when you married me. I didn't know anything when I married you. I was 19 years old, and my parents sold me to settle a debt. I never had a choice about any of it, and you knew that, and you punished me for it anyway. But all I said was, I'm aware. He stared at me another beat, then sighed, running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he was frustrated. Look, I'll come to your room tonight. Once everyone's settled, I'll come to you and we can talk this through. It's not as bad as it seems. I turned back to my packing, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped a blouse. You don't need to do that. I want to. You're my wife. You should be in my bed. Should be. That word again. Maybe not tonight, I said, calm and even, the way you speak to a child who's about to throw a tantrum. Why don't you spend some time with Lily? She's been through a lot. Something shifted in his expression. Pleasure, maybe, or relief. He'd been expecting a fight, and I'd given him permission to do exactly what he wanted. Spend the night with the woman he'd actually loved, the one he'd been denied, the one he'd spent decades resenting me for taking away. Are you sure? Positive. He didn't ask me again. He just nodded, gave my shoulder one last squeeze, and walked out of the room. The moment the door closed, I stopped pretending. For 20 years, I'd been invisible, not in the dramatic, melodramatic way, not screaming for attention or throwing myself into crises, just invisible. The kind of invisible that happens when people look at you and see wife, mother, obligation, and never, ever Eleanor. I got used to it. I told myself it was enough. I told myself that I'd married a good man, a successful man, a man who'd provided for me and our 2 children even if he'd never loved me. I told myself that love wasn't everything, that companionship mattered more, that I could be happy with the life I'd built if I just tried hard enough. And then I died. And then I woke up here, in the body of a 48-year-old woman who'd only just realized she'd been a prisoner in her own marriage. I pulled the last of my things out of the closet and paused. The pregnancy test was still in my apron pocket, the one I'd worn at breakfast. I pulled it out and stared at the 2 pink lines, impossibly small and ordinary, and thought about the child I'd never get to know. In my previous life, I'd found out I was pregnant a week later. I told James on our 20th anniversary, hoping the news would finally break through the ice around his heart. I'd built a whole future around that baby, a future where he'd finally love me, finally see me, finally stop treating me like a mistake he'd been forced to make. And then Lily had come back. She'd waltzed into our lives 2 months after I told him, freshly divorced and desperate for closure, and James had crumpled like a paper bag. Suddenly, I was invisible again. Suddenly, I was just the woman who'd ruined everything. Suddenly, my pregnancy was a burden rather than a blessing. I'd spent 9 months carrying that baby. Hoping he'd come around, I'd spent labor alone because James had to work late. I'd spent my first night as a mother in an empty hospital room, holding a daughter he hadn't even come to see. And then I'd spent the rest of my life pretending it didn't hurt. I looked at the test one more time, my thumb pressed against the plastic edge, and I knew what I had to do. I tucked it back into my pocket and finished packing. When I was done, I had 2 garbage bags, one full of clothes I'd never wear, one full of the lingerie James had bought to make me feel like a commodity. The rest of my things were already in the smaller room upstairs. A few books, a painting I'd kept from my grandmother's house, a stuffed rabbit our daughter had given me when she was 6. The important things were already out of reach. I went downstairs just in time to see Lily modeling new clothes in the living room. She'd changed into a sundress, peach-colored and flowy, spinning in the middle of the room with her arms outstretched like she was on a runway. James sat on the couch with his phone in his lap, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "James bought these for me," Lily said, catching my eye and smiling. Not a triumphant smile, not a cruel one, just the same sunny, guileless expression she'd always worn. "He took me shopping a whole afternoon. I'm so sorry if I kept him away from you. Eleanor, I just haven't been able to shop properly in months, and he said I deserve to feel good about myself." She said it so sweetly, so innocently, that I almost believed she meant no harm. Almost. But I'd been watching her for 30 years. I knew the patterns. I knew how she wrapped men around her finger by being helpless, fragile, just a girl who needed protecting. I knew how she'd do anything, say anything, twist anything, to keep herself at the center of someone's universe. And I knew that if she'd really wanted James to love her, she'd have stayed. She'd never have married someone else. She'd never have left. The bitterness of that thought caught me off guard. I'd never let myself feel angry at her. Not for the engagement, not for the years they'd spent apart, not for the way she'd waltzed back into our lives at the worst possible moment. I'd always blamed myself. If I'd been prettier, smarter, more deserving, he'd have chosen me. If I'd been everything she was, he'd have wanted me the way he wanted her. I swallowed the bitterness and said, "They look nice." Lily paused in her spinning, her eyes widening with that manufactured surprise she'd perfected over the years. "You're not upset?" "I know it must be hard, seeing someone else in clothes your husband bought. But James said he just wanted me to feel comfortable, and I really didn't want to spend the week in my old things." James looked up from his phone, frowning at me like I'd already said something wrong. "Eleanor doesn't mind. We talked about it." "We didn't talk about anything. I packed my bags and you left me alone and we didn't talk about any of it." "I don't mind," I said, my voice flat and even. "You should wear whatever makes you comfortable." Lily's smile faltered for just a second. I saw it. That tiny crack in the facade, that flicker of confusion that meant I wasn't reacting the way I was supposed to. I end my previous life, I'd have cried. I'd have locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed until James found me and promised me he'd make it right. I'd have given her exactly what she wanted. Proof that she still mattered, that she was still the one he'd come back to. Instead, I turned and walked into the kitchen, where my mother was unpacking groceries I hadn't asked for. "Eleanor, darling," she said, using that British effect again. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought some things for breakfast tomorrow. I know you're probably not used to cooking for more than 2, and with Lily's dietary restrictions." "Lily's dietary restrictions?" My mother flushed. She's been struggling with her health, you know. She can't tolerate gluten or dairy or refined sugar. It's been such a difficult adjustment. Difficult adjustment. I thought about the months I'd spent in the hospital after my daughter was born, recovering from complications James had never come to check on. I thought about the years I'd spent pretending I was fine when I was drowning, pretending I was happy when I was miserable, pretending I'd made peace with a marriage that was never going to be anything but a cage. "Maybe you should focus on Lily," I said. "She's the one who's having a hard time. I'm fine." My mother's eyes narrowed, just slightly, just enough to let me know I wasn't playing the game right. In her mind, I was supposed to be grateful for the scraps of attention she threw my way, grateful for the roof over my head, grateful for a husband who barely tolerated me because at least someone had been willing to pay off the debt. She'd never forgiven me for being alive. She'd never forgiven me for being born at all. "I don't know what's gotten into you today," she said, her voice cool. "You've always been so understanding, so easy to talk to. Are you feeling ill?" "I'm feeling like I've lived this life before, and I'm tired of pretending it's enough." "I'm fine," I said, and walked out of the kitchen before she could ask me anything else. The 3rd floor was quiet. Dark. The kind of quiet that settled over houses like this, big houses where no one ever talked about anything real. I'd asked James for a room up here, after Lily had taken the guest room, and he'd agreed, without really paying attention. The room was small, a converted attic space with low ceilings and dormer windows and a twin bed that looked like it had been left over from some previous owner's child. There was a small dresser, a closet with space for half my clothes, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of the lavender air fresheners James's mother had bought when she visited years ago. It was perfect. I closed the door and sat down on the bed, my bags at my feet, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding in all day, the anger, the grief. The bone-deep exhaustion of pretending I was okay when I'd never been okay once in my entire life. And underneath it all, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 3 decades. It rang 4 times before a voice answered, rough, sleepy, clearly woken from a nap. Hello. David. My voice cracked on his name, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. It's Eleanor Montgomery. I know this is out of the blue. I know we haven't talked in ages, but I need help. A pause. Then quiet. What kind of help? Not the kind you're thinking. I'm done with that. I took a breath. I need to get away. I need to start over. I need to be somewhere he can't find me. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him thinking through the static, could picture him rubbing his eyes and shaking his head at the wall the way he'd always done when I'd called him at 3 a.m, desperate and crying. Tell me you're ready this time, he said. Tell me you're not going to change your mind. I'm ready. Then I'll make some calls. I'll get back to you in a week. A week. 1 week to get out. 1 week to disappear. 1 week to make sure James and Lily and my parents and everyone else who'd ever taken me for granted understood that Eleanor Montgomery was done being invisible. I hung up the phone and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 30 years, I let myself smile. The next morning, I started putting my plan in motion. The first step was easy. I had to make sure no one would notice when I left. And the best way to do that was to make myself even more invisible than I'd already been. I woke up early, earlier than James, earlier than Lily, earlier than anyone else in the house, and I made breakfast, bacon, eggs, fresh fruit, the same spread I'd put out the morning before. I poured coffee into 3 mugs and tea into 1, and when Lily came down in a silk robe, her hair tousled from sleep, I smiled and offered her a seat at the table. Good morning, I said. Sleep well? She blinked at me, clearly confused by this departure from the script. In my previous life, I'd have been red-eyed and red-nosed, mourning my marriage while she was looking radiant after a night in my husband's bed. Eleanor, you didn't have to. I wanted to. I set a plate in front of her, eggs and bacon, exactly the way she'd always liked it. I know you're going through a tough time. I want you to feel welcome here. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the trick, the trap, the hidden edge. I'd been doing this so long that I knew every micro-expression, every tiny flicker of anxiety or triumph. She was waiting for me to crack, to cry, to make a scene that would justify James's attention on her. Thank you, she said finally, picking up her fork with visible confusion. That's so kind of you. Kind. She'd used that word to describe me my whole life. Eleanor's so kind, S-O understanding, S-O patient. It was the polite way of saying so desperate, so pathetic, so eager to please that she'll let anyone walk all over her. But she was still using it, still seeing me the same way, still underestimating exactly how far I'd go to get what I wanted. I wanted freedom. I wanted peace. I wanted to live a life where no one called me kind because they'd run out of better things to say. And I was going to get it starting today. You have to take the groceries. I was standing at the back door, my coat on, my keys in hand, when my father grabbed my arm and dragged me into the mudroom. His grip was tight, unforgiving, the same way he'd grabbed me when I was 15, and he'd found out I'd applied for a summer job without asking. You heard your mother that we need supplies. You go to the store, you get what she's written down, and you bring it back here. He shoved a crumpled list into my hand, the same handwritten scrawl my mother had been using for 40 years. Groceries. Everything she'd just told me she'd brought for Lily's dietary restrictions. I was about to leave, I said. I don't have time. You have time. He was bigger than me, broader in the shoulders, his bulk filling the doorway. Your mother needs things, and you're the only one who isn't doing anything right now. I'm doing plenty. I was pulling strings, making calls, arranging for a new life somewhere far away from all of them. But I couldn't say that, so I just folded the list into my coat pocket and said, fine. He stepped back, satisfied, and I walked out to the garage feeling like I was already free. The store was crowded, too crowded, and I moved through it on autopilot, grabbing everything on my mother's list without really seeing it. Her handwriting was sloppy, the letters cramped together like she'd been in a hurry, and I wondered what urgent project she'd been working on when she'd written it down. I was halfway through the produce aisle when my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Found you. See you soon. My heart stopped. I scanned the store, my eyes frantically searching the faces of strangers, but no one was looking at me. Everyone was absorbed in their own errands, their own lives, their own problems. But someone had found me, someone knew where I was, someone had tracked my phone or my car or my credit card or any of the million little trails I'd left behind without even thinking about it. I pocketed the phone and finished my shopping in a daze. The checkout line took forever. The cashier was slow, distracted, chatting with a bagger about something that didn't matter. I was surrounded by noise and movement, and nothing made sense. When I got back to the car, I dialed the unknown number. No answer. I tried again. No answer. I dealt with this before. In my previous life, James had been obsessed with where I was, who I was seeing, what I was doing. He tracked me. He'd followed me. He'd made sure I knew I couldn't escape. But we were still married. He had no reason to track me now, not when Lily was here, not when he was finally getting everything he'd wanted. Unless he did. Unless he knew something I didn't. I drove home with my heart pounding the whole way, and when I pulled into the driveway, James was standing on the front porch, his phone in his hand, waiting for me. He didn't look angry. He looked cold. The way he'd looked at me when I told him I was pregnant, right before he'd left me alone. Eleanor, he said as I climbed out of the car, I need to talk to you. About what? He gestured toward the house, and I followed him inside. My parents were in the living room, faces tight, arms crossed. Marcus was standing by the fireplace, his jaw set. Lily sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. We know, James said. I blinked. Know what? About the baby. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back, one hand reaching for the doorframe to steady myself. What baby? Don't. Marcus pointed at me, his finger jabbing the air. We found the test in your coat pocket. You think we're stupid? We've been watching you. Eleanor, do we know you've been hiding something? We know you're trying to leave. I felt the blood drain from my face. Found the test. Found my coat. Found the one thing I'd been trying to keep secret. I'm not trying to leave, I said, but even I could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Bullshit. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes blazing. We know you've been making calls. Do we know you've been setting things up? Do we know you're planning to just disappear? Like you're the victim. Like you haven't been taking advantage of us for years. Taking advantage. I almost laughed. I end my 23 years of marriage. I'd asked James for nothing. I'd asked my parents for nothing. I'd cooked, cleaned, raised 2 children, kept house, made myself small and manageable and grateful for every scrap they'd thrown my way. And they were accusing me of being a user? I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I've been here all day. I've been doing what I always do, taking care of everyone, making sure everyone's comfortable. You tell me what I've done wrong and I'll fix it. Eleanor. I'll fix it, Dad. Just tell me what I did. There was a long pause. My father's eyes searched my face, looking for the lie, looking for the truth, not knowing which one he was supposed to believe. My mother stepped forward, her mouth opening like she was going to say something sharp. But then Lily spoke. Eleanor, I'm sorry. Her voice was small and trembling, just like it always got when she needed to be the center of attention. This is all my fault. I'm the one who made everything complicated. I should never have come here. I should never have. Lily. James's hand was on her shoulder, pulling her close. You didn't do anything wrong. I did, James. I'm causing problems between you and your wife. I don't want to be the reason you. You're not. He cut her off, his voice firm. This isn't about you. This is about her. He looked at me then, his eyes like ice. Eleanor, we need to talk. Privately. I nodded, my throat tight. I followed him into the study, and when I closed the door behind us, he turned on me with an intensity one hadn't seen in years. Who are you on the phone with? I don't know what you mean. Don't bullshit me. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn for 20 years. I know you're planning something. You've been acting strange since yesterday, and I don't believe for a second that you're okay with Lily being here. What would you like me to say, James? That I'm thrilled she's in my house, that I think it's wonderful she's going to be living with us. Because if that's what you need to hear, I can say it. I can pretend this is all fine, but I've done it before. He jerked back like I'd slapped him. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've spent my whole life pretending. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Pretending I was fine when I was drowning. Pretending I was happy when I was miserable. Pretending I didn't know you were still in love with her. And I'm tired. James, I'm so tired of pretending. He stared at me, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something that might have been guilt. Eleanor, if you just talk to me. I talked to you. I laughed, a bitter sound that scraped my throat. I talked to you for 23 years, James, and you never listened. You never wanted to listen. Because I was never the one you wanted to hear. Silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but I was already turning away, my hand on the door handle, ready to leave. We're not done, he said. We are. And I walked out, leaving him alone in the study, the ghost of his lost love still echoing in the room. I went straight up to my room and locked the door, and my hands were shaking, my heart racing, my whole body thrumming with the adrenaline of what I'd just done. I'd said the words I'd been holding inside for decades. I'd finally let him see how much he'd hurt me, and in the process, I'd probably made everything worse. But I didn't care. Because tomorrow I was going to start leaving. Tomorrow I was going to disappear. And by the time they realized I was gone, I'd be so far away that none of them would ever find me. I opened my drawer and pulled out the phone, ready to start making arrangements. And then I saw it. A piece of paper, folded twice, tucked between the plastic wrapper and the battery. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling, and read the words inside. I know what you're doing, and I'm going to stop you. I read it again, and again. My mother's handwriting. She knew. She'd always known. And she was going to make sure I couldn't leave. I stared at the note in my hand, my mother's cramped handwriting burning through the paper. I know what you're doing, and I'm going to stop you. How long had she known? Hours, days, since the moment I'd picked up the phone and dialed David's number. I'd been so careful, so meticulous, and yet she'd been watching me the entire time, waiting for me to slip so she could spring her trap. I crumpled the note and shoved it into my pocket, then pulled out my phone and called David, and oh, answer. I tried again, voicemail. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed out a frantic text. She knows, my mother knows, we need to move faster. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then a single word, call me. I pressed dial, and this time, he picked up on the first ring. Eleanor, listen to me. Your mother called my office an hour ago. She threatened to report me for financial fraud if I helped you. She's already contacted my partners, I can't touch your accounts, and I can't book anything in your name. She's walked every avenue I had. I closed my eyes, feeling the walls close in. What about cash? I have savings. She knows about those too. She's already filed a motion to freeze your joint accounts with James, claiming you're mentally unstable and a flight risk. James is going along with it. He signed the papers this morning. This morning, while I've been making breakfast and pretending everything was fine, James had been signing papers to lock me in. David, I can't stay here. You know what they'll do to me. I know. His voice was tight, anguished. Eleanor, I've known you for 30 years, and I've never seen you like this. Whatever you're planning, you need to be smart. You can't fight them head on. You have to outthink them. Outthink them how? Find leverage. Something they want more than they want to control you. And use it. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing. Leverage. What did my mother want more than anything? Money, status, the appearance of a perfect family. And Lily. Lily was her prize, her proof that she'd done something right. If I could threaten to expose something that would destroy the image she'd spent decades crafting, she might back off. But what could I expose? I thought back to my previous life, to the years I'd spent watching my mother from a distance, trying to understand why she'd always hated me. In my final years, when I was sick and dying and no one cared, I'd overheard her talking to my father in the hospital waiting room. She was never mine, she'd said. She was always hers. I just had to clean up the mess. Hers. Who was her? I never asked. I never had the courage. But now, with nothing left to lose, I decided I was going to find out. The door to my room burst open before I could stand. My mother stood in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. Behind her, James hovered, his expression unreadable. Eleanor, we need to talk. I stood slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. About what? About your plans. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. I found the appointment card in your coat pocket, the one from the clinic. You're planning to terminate your pregnancy, aren't you? My blood went cold. I thought I'd hidden that card, tucked it deep into my wallet, but she'd found it anyway. That's none of your business. It's absolutely my business when you're using my son-in-law's money to kill his child. She turned to James, her eyes glinting with triumph. Did you hear that, James? She was going to abort your baby without telling you, without even asking your permission. James stepped forward, his face darkening. Eleanor, is that true? I looked at him, at the man I'd married, the man I loved, the man who'd spent 23 years treating me like furniture. I was going to tell you, after I'd done it. After? His voice rose, cracking at the edges. You're going to kill our child and then tell me? It's not a child yet. It's a cluster of cells, and I'm not keeping it because I'm not staying. I met his eyes, letting him see the truth I'd never shown him before. I'm leaving James. I'm leaving you. I'm leaving this family, and I'm never coming back, and I won't be tied to you for the rest of my life with a child you'll only use to control me. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. Then James laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes. You think you can leave? You think you have anywhere to go? Eleanor, you have nothing. You've had nothing for 23 years. Everything you have, the house, the money, the status, it's all mine, and I'm not letting you walk away with any of it. I don't want any of it. Then what do you want? Freedom, I wanted to say. Peace. A life where I don't have to pretend. But before I could answer, my mother stepped between us, her hand on James's arm. James, darling, let me handle this. Eleanor and I need to have a private conversation. James hesitated, his eyes flickering between us, but he nodded and stepped back. Feeney, but I want that card. And I want your phone. I handed over both without protest. It didn't matter. I had a backup phone hidden in the bathroom, and I'd memorized David's number. When the door closed behind him, my mother turned to me, her expression softening into something that might have been pity. Eleanor, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. And I need you to listen carefully. I crossed my arms, waiting. Your father and I weren't always married. Before I met him, he was involved with another woman. A woman named Helena. My stomach dropped. Who was Helena? She was my sister. My mother's voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. And she was pregnant with you when she died. The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my hand reaching for the wall to steady myself. You're lying. I wish I was. Your father and I were already engaged when he met her. She was younger, prettier, easier tea fell for her. Knocked her up, and then she died in childbirth, leaving him with you. And leaving me to clean up the mess. I stared at her, my mind reeling. All those years of coldness, of distance, of subtle cruelty, it all made sense now. I wasn't her daughter. I was the reminder of her husband's betrayal. Then why did you raise me? I heard myself ask, my voice hollow. Because your father's family had money, and if he'd publicly acknowledged you as his child, he'd have lost it all. S.O., we pretended you were mine. We made it official. And I spent the rest of my life looking at the face of the woman who stole my husband and pretending to love her child. She said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that I almost believed she'd made peace with it. But I could see the hatred in her eyes, the decades of resentment she'd buried under smiles and polite conversation. You hated me, I said. My whole life, you hated me. I didn't hate you. She paused, then corrected herself. I hated what you represented, but I did my duty. I fed you, clothed you, educated you. I made sure you married well. And now you're going to throw all of that away because you can't accept that your husband loves someone else. He doesn't love Lily. He loves the idea of Lily. Does it matter? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're 48 years old, Eleanor. You have 2 grown children who barely speak to you, a husband who's been sleeping in the guest room for years, and no career, no prospects, no future. If you leave now, you'll be alone. Completely alone. And you'll die alone. That last word hit me like a slap. Die alone. In my previous life, I died alone in a hospital room with no one but strangers around me. While James held Lily's hand and begged God to let him die without me, I'd already lived that future. And I decided it wasn't going to be my future again. Maybe I'll die alone, I said, my voice steady, but at least I'll die free. My mother's eyes widened for a moment. She looked almost impressed. Then the mask came back down, cold and hard. You're making a mistake, but I'll give you one chance to fix IT. Stayed, be a good wife. Have the baby, and I'll make sure your father signs over the lake house to you when he dies. That's more than you deserve, and it's more than you'll get if you walk out that door. I looked at her, this woman who'd lied to me for 50 years, who'd made me feel worthless and unloved, and then blamed me for it, and I realized that she'd never really seen me. She'd only seen the ghost of her sister, the shadow of her husband's betrayal. I don't want the lake house, I said. I don't want anything from you, and I'm not staying. I walked past her, out the door and down the stairs, my feet carrying me to the one place I knew I could think. The garage. I'd always liked the garage. It was the one part of the house that was truly mine. I turned it into a small workshop over the years, a place where I could tinker and fix things and pretend I had some control over my life. The walls were lined with tools, the floor stained with oil, and in the corner was an old workbench I'd found at a yard sale and refinished myself. I sat down on the stool and stared at the wall, trying to think. My mother's revelation had thrown me, but it also gave me something I'd never had before, a reason for the coldness, for the neglect, for the years of being treated like an inconvenience. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. IT was about a woman who died before I could even speak, and a man who'd chosen to hide his shame instead of protecting his daughter. I pulled out my backup phone and dialed David's number again. This time he picked up. Eleanor, what happened? You sound different. David, I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Helena, my mother's sister. She died in childbirth, and I need to know the circumstances. A pause. That's a pretty deep dive. Why? Because I think my father might have killed her. The words came out before I could stop them. I never had that thought before, never let myself go there. But now, with everything out in the open, it made a terrible kind of sense. My mother had said Helena died in childbirth. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if my father had done something to ensure she never made it out of the delivery room? David was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor, that's a serious accusation. You can't jest. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking you to look into it. Please. If I'm going to get out of this, I need leverage. Something that makes them too scared to stop me. He sighed. I'll see what I can find. But Eleanor, be careful. These people have resources you don't have, and they've already shown they're willing to use them. I hung up and sat in the quiet of the garage, my mind churning. The woman who'd raised me wasn't my mother. The man who'd abandoned me wasn't my father. The family I'd spent my whole life trying to please was a lie, from beginning to end. And if I was going to survive, I needed to tear that lie apart. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in my tiny third-floor room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every look, every subtle slight I'd endured over the years. The pieces were finally coming together, but the picture they formed was uglier than I'd ever imagined. Just after midnight, I heard a soft knock at my door. I sat up, my heart racing, and called out, "Who's there?" "It's Lily." I hesitated. In my previous life, Lily had never come to my room at night. She'd never spoken to me alone, never shown any interest in me except as an obstacle to be removed. But here, in this new life, she was knocking on my door. "What do you want?" "Can I come in? Please?" I opened the door, and Lily slipped inside, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was dressed in a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked smaller somehow, less certain than the confident woman I'd seen downstairs. "Eleanor, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you." "About what?" She sat on the edge of my bed, her hands clasped in her lap, and took a deep breath. "I know you think I'm trying to steal James, but that's not true. I never wanted to steal anyone. I needed a way out." "A way out of what?" "Of my marriage, of my life."